Today, we have the pleasure of having the two editors who wrote the book Illegal Mining, Organized Crime, Corruption, and Ecocide in a Resource-Scarce World with us. I'd like to give you a brief introduction to them. Just so you know, we are recording the session, and the session will eventually be put on our YouTube channel. So if there's anything you miss or want to revisit, there should be a possibility to do that. Without further ado, let me introduce our authors. So Yuliya is an associate professor of international criminal justice in the Department of Political Science at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, City University of New York, so CUNY. Her research covers various forms of transnational organized crime and corruption and the existing domestic, regional, and global mechanisms for their prevention and control. Before joining John Jay College in 2014, she was visiting fellow at the European Institute for Crime Prevention and Control, affiliated with the United Nations, so also known as HOINI, the Finnish Center for Russian and Eastern European Studies, Moscow office of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, George Mason University Tract, and postdoctoral scholar and lecturer at the University of Edinburgh and Massark University, respectively. She has also contributed to funded projects of the European Commission and the U.S. Department of State. She's worked as a consultant for the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, and has taught at George C. Marshall European Center for Security Studies in Germany. Daan is an assistant professor in criminology at Utrecht University, specialized in green criminology. He conducted research on various forms of environmental crime, such as transnational wildlife trafficking, deforestation, and timber trade in Southeast Asia, illegal mining in Latin America, and the illegal trade in dogs in Europe, and assisted in several lawsuits. Daan van Oom obtained his PhD in criminology at Utrecht University in 2016, and in 2018 he received the prestigious Venny Grant of the Dutch Organization for Scientific Research for his research project, The Diversification of Organized Crime into the Illegal Trade in Natural Resources. Van Oom primarily focuses on research in the context of green crimes and harms. So thank you very much, Yuliya and Daan, for joining us today. We're very excited to hear more about the book. And without further ado, I'll give you the floor. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the invitation to be here today. We are honored to present our book, Illegal Mining, Organized Crime, Corruption, and Ecocide in a Resource-Scarce World today with you. We both edited this book, which has been published in 2020 by Palgrave, with a foreword by Rika Putone from the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. And this is actually a timely book where we bring together over 20 scholars into the understudied but urgent topic of illegal mining by combining different theoretical approaches, including organized crime theory and green criminology. The focus areas of our book include, but are not limited to, illegal mining as an emerging crime in the sense of the United Nations Convention against transnational organized crime, informal versus illegal mining, criminal governance, diversification of organized crime, crime convergence, illegal mining and other serious crimes, illegal mining associated illicit forms like money laundering through gold and diamonds, but also complicity of legal persons and of course the serious environmental harms associated with illegal mining. Well, Yuliya will now discuss the context, resolutions, and the important concepts in relation to mining. Then I will take it over by discussing the diversification of organized crime into mining and the environmental harms. And Yuliya will finish with the responses to illegal mining and conclusions. And we have, of course, at the end, time to answer some of your questions.
Daan. So I'm going to start with the general policy background for the topic, and we are extremely pleased that finally legal mining can be discussed as a standalone topic, especially in the context of transnational organized crime. And I think this is one of the revolutionary achievements that we were able to have with the book, to discuss it separately and to discuss it as an organized crime topic. I'm not saying that this was not really done previously, but it was done more in the form of reports, and also there's an academic journal called Extractive Industries, which cover illegal mining, but mostly with the focus on in artisanal forms of extra legal mining operations, and not exactly framing the issue as organized crime. And I think this is something new that has been emerging in the policy debate recently. The discussions on illegal mining that I was able to track go back to 2008 and 2010 in the form of deliberations within the Conference of the Parties to UNTOC. UNTOC is a unique convention in the sense that it doesn't really define transnational organized crime, doesn't put it in a box. There is no list of what forms of criminality constitute transnational organized crime. So it only defines organized crime group and serious crime. So any crime that falls into those two categories, including illegal mining, could be understood as transnational organized crime. And as I said, there were deliberations with the COP to UNTOC on those emerging forms of crime, including cybercrime, trafficking in cultural property, environmental crime, wildlife crime included, organ trafficking, and maritime piracy. And the conceptual framework is still in the making. Sometimes these crimes are called emerging crimes, though I believe that a crime like maritime piracy, trafficking in cultural property, or illegal mining should be understood more as re-emergent crimes, right? We can go back to the origins of civilizations, and illegal mining was already there, same with maritime piracy. But it's only today that the international community is becoming more conscious about the harms, so this forms of deviance fall into the category of organized crime. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but what I want to bring your attention to is that from those deliberations within COP, there were several resolutions submitted to Ecocide in 2013 and then in 2019, and the discussion in the policy community shifted towards illicit trafficking in precious metals. So the focus seemed to be more on cross-border criminality that involves precious metals. Minerals were not really mentioned. As I said, the focus was on the harms and the potential of criminal enterprises to expand and undermine the rule of law through the corruption of law enforcement and judicial officials, as here. And then in 2019, there was this nexus or linkage made between trafficking in precious metals and sustainable development, so to say. So I think in 2019, the Sustainable Development Agenda was high after its adoption in 2015. So we see how the discourse changes a little bit, given more space for deliberations on illegal mining. And then finally, most recently, I think what happened is that there was this very appropriate rediscussion or shift from trafficking in precious metals towards illegal mining. You know, if we want to truly fix the problem related to illegal mining, we need to go to illegal mining on mining sites and not only just focus on cross-border criminality, right? So there needs to be this holistic approach. So in 2016, 2018, Colombian government was very much interested in the topic. They had a study together with the UNODC regional office and the Ministry of the Mines and Energy of Colombia, where they looked at alluvial gold exploitation in the country. I have a linked report here. And they were using very, I guess, innovative technology or methodology for this. They relied on remote sensing and satellite images to understand where exactly illegal mining activities have been taking place. And then in 2020, there was another noteworthy study supported by the government of South Africa, and they looked at illegal surface as well as underground mining. And also they were considering the connection between illegal mining activities and the inflow of migrants, particularly those that came with the help of migrant smuggling organizations. Right, so this is just an example, a screenshot of remote sensing images, of satellite images. They show the crucial connection between deforestation and illegal mining. On this graph, 2016, you see very minor areas of deforestation, and then in just a few months after that, the areas of deforestation have been expanded. I think it just, we didn't really cover remote sensing much in the book, but I'm passionate about this new approach of using satellite technology for trying to understand and of course counter crimes such as illegal mining and also illegal logging, deforestation, etc. Anyway, moving back to the topic of illegal mining, in the book, we cover a lot of metals and minerals, perhaps not all of them. I think there should be volume 2 coming up to focus on the wide range of metals and minerals that are preferred by criminal organizations. So some of these are certainly precious metals and minerals: gold, platinum, diamonds. Diamonds is an old topic, which is still relevant today. Conflict diamonds, Kimberley process, etc., which we do cover in this volume. Then semi-precious stones have been on the rise: amber, lapis lazuli, the blue stone, sapphires. So these are all very popular semi-precious stones in the market today, and some of them, if not most of them, have been really obtained through illegal means in the form of illegal mining. Industrial minerals, coal and sand. The GI Global Initiative recently, or last year, had a very interesting report on illegal sand mining, especially in mega cities in Singapore and in India. This is the future. I think there should be more attention paid to this. And then finally, technology metals, 3Ts, tin, tungsten, and tantalum. Oh, I mentioned it twice, I apologize. So these are also widely popular metals for technology. There's a lot of demand for them, and there needs to be more transparency in terms of how these metals are excavated and processed and then sold. So focus on supply chains. Dan already mentioned criminal convergence between illegal mining and other crimes, and this was in the heart of in the core of our book. So we looked at the linkages between illegal mining and trafficking in persons, both for sex and for labor. We also considered the issue of smuggling of migrants, particularly in the context of South Africa. We didn't find too many connections between illegal mining and smuggling of migrants in other places. Environmental crimes, mercury contamination, deforestation, soil erosion. Then we'll speak more about ecocidal effects of illegal mining just when I finish my section. Population displacement, which has negatively impacted indigenous communities, is absolutely important to be discussed in the context of illegal mining. And finally, extralegal governance and violence. Obviously, extortion is one of the bread and butter crimes for traditional organized crime groups, and this was, in my opinion, the entry point for criminal organizations to be able to control informal mines and victimize informal mining communities. And that, of course, brought to violence and conflicts between different rival groups, and also to violent conflicts between organized crime groups trying to establish control over informal mining sites versus the police, which oftentimes in some locations depended on bribes coming from informal miners. And then, of course, financial crimes. Now, if we don't understand how the money is flowing in relation to illegal mining operations, then I don't think it will be possible to curtail this crime in any possible way. We have a few images here. These images in a way show the hard conditions in which workers have to labor on illegal mining, informal mining sites. It's hard work, and sometimes they are not covered. They don't have any social health insurance. They don't have formal employment. Sometimes they are paid, sometimes they are not paid, so the protections are not really there. It's not always that they are fully exploited, but sometimes labor exploitation is severe. What you see on this image is an amber field, an illegal amber field in Ukraine. Well, there are a couple of issues that we can see. Well, first of course is the environmental harm coming from high pressure pumping method for getting the amber stones from the earth. And then also this is an illegal site. It's sometimes controlled by criminal organizations, sometimes it's controlled by the police, and sometimes it's controlled by informal miners turning into gangs, trying to establish control and protect the place where they work, the territory, the amber territory where they work. So there are multiple complexities embedded in the picture. Another interesting dimension that we were able to discover is the nexus or linkage between illegal mining and, I will call them non-state armed groups, but what I really mean is insurgencies and terrorist organizations. So the two examples that we know mostly about, that we have heard about, and there is sufficient evidence to be able to make those claims, as Somalia and Afghanistan. We know about extortion, racketeering of illicitly traded charcoal by Al-Shabaab, and there is a lot of information on this topic that can be taken from Security Council expert group and monitoring mission of Somalia. And then in Afghanistan, there is some evidence that Taliban affiliated groups have been controlling illegal mining sites for lapis lazuli as well as talc. Who would think about talc and criminal connection, right? So I will move it. I will give the presentation back to Daan, who will tell you a little bit about diversification of criminal organizations into illegal mining. Daan?
So yeah, what we see in relation to illegal mining is that it actually reflects that the rising global scarcity of natural resources attracts organized crime groups. So it is about the high revenues from the trade in metals and minerals, the lesser severity of this crime in legal systems compared to other serious crimes, profit from extortion of mining sites, but also the possibility of using them for money laundering purposes and the possibility of tapping into illegal labor and sex markets. Actually, they all play a role here. And therefore, I think it's important to realize that some organized crime groups rapidly shift from traditional criminal activities, such as drugs or human trafficking, to the illegal trade in natural resources. They react to socio-economic, political, or ecological changes by looking for opportunities to diversify their illegal activities. So what we see in our study is that, for example, drug cartels in Latin America transform their activities into gold mining. Militias in Africa are increasingly interested in all kinds of gemstones, while in Southeast Asia, organized crime groups invest in mining natural resources as we speak. So the question is actually, how and why do organized crime groups diversify into illegal mining? And what are the environmental harms, of course? And by looking at the convergence between environmental crime on the one hand and the other hand, other serious crimes or organized crime, the environmental crime continuum on the next, on this slide can assist to have a better understanding of the link between environmental crime and other serious crimes, including organized crime. And as you see, 5 points are situated here on the environmental crime continuum, and each single point displays a form of convergence between organized crime, situated on the far left, and environmental crime, situated on the far right. And the level of diversification of organized crime into environmental crime increases during the stages gradually, from minor diversification of organized crime groups to overall domination over illegal mining, for example, or illegal mines. And in the first stage, this model shows that alliances between organized crime groups and environmental crime groups may be established for expert knowledge or operational services, like social relationships within legitimate business settings. So such alliances are established to share information, such as communication technologies, or provide access to smuggling routes. For example, alliances can be arranged for smuggling gold along routes established for other types of illicit commodities, such as drugs. In the second stage, you see crime mutualism between organized crime groups and environmental crime groups that can be established in a long-term way for sharing natural resources, stopping mutual adversaries, and the spreading of crime. And this may involve symbiotic relationships for both illegal and legal activities for mutual benefits. Here you can think of bartering, cocaine being exchanged for gold, or camouflage when a legitimate mining company is used to conceal illegal activities. The second stage involves also a higher degree of diversification as organized crime becomes increasingly involved in illegal mining through crime mutualism. In the third stage, convergence, organized crime groups and environmental crime groups could converge and form a single entity that simultaneously displays characteristics of both groups. So in this scenario, crime groups eventually converge completely and become one and the same in the middle of the continuum. And this reflects the confluence of different forms of illegal activities, as well as the ability to diversify. For example, a criminal organization involved in both drug trafficking and gold mining, examples that we found many times during our researches in the book. So this stage applies mostly to hybrid, multifaceted crime groups with the capability to diversify into illegal mining while holding on their usual crime portfolio. Can be drugs, can be something else. In the fourth stage, criminal groups may transform into new criminal organizations in order to adapt to changing circumstances. Can be socioeconomic, ecological, political. In this transformation, the crime groups depart from their traditional activities in order to infiltrate other criminal markets, such as the gold market. And this criminal career shift may influence their operations because they have become so fixated so keenly on one criminal activity that they may drop the other one altogether. For example, a drug cartel involved in mainly drugs shifting to illegal mining and drops drug trafficking altogether. In the final stage, we see organized crime that starts to dominate specific areas or trade lines. And I think this is the traditional perspective of organized crime. They control a particular region, a particular territory, and by the use of violence, intimidation, and extortion. And in this stage, the organized crime groups are socially embedded in the local communities, part of the social and political order. And in this final stage, organized crime takes completely control and dominates over mining. So what we see in this continuum, as I show in the next sheet, is that the next slide will show that actually in relation to illegal mining, crime groups can be linked to other crimes taking place in their territory. Already mentioned by Yuliya is that many studies took place that show that actually the presence in Colombia, for example, of coca crops in municipalities are often connected also and overlapping with producing gold regions. And this makes sense if you think about the overlap. But in addition to the geographic proximity of cocaine and gold, the increased economic value of minerals and metals, but also the intensified enforcement activities in response to other crimes, such as drug business in Colombia, may attract crime groups, including the notorious Colombian Gulf clan in the border region between Colombia and Panama, as we describe in our book. And the absence of the state and the presence of valuable natural resources is in particular attractive for them. So they control already access roads, movement corridors, and influence the political administrative decisions, but also increasingly dominate mining regions and natural resources. Another example in our book, which illustrates the diversification of organized crime, is the Knights Templar cartel in Mexico, known as drug trafficking cartel operating in southern Mexico. And in recent years, they became involved in the exploitation of various natural resources, including the mining and export of iron ore. And this economic diversification was for them a strategic opportunity to diversify their sources of income while remaining active in drug trafficking. The dominant position of both organized crime groups and strong ties with the local populations and politics illustrate how they actually transform their business into the illegal trade in natural resources, while facilitated by their criminal infrastructures. So this shows how geopolitical, economic, and ecological factors influence the career paths of organized crime. And although organized crime groups traditionally prefer to extort from those working in mining areas in the past, what we see is that this is changing in the last couple of years in specific regions across the world, where actually mines, for example, in Congo, are increasingly under control of organized crime groups and militias extracting minerals by themselves and metals and smuggle the metals and minerals across the borders. A concrete example is Northwest Colombia, where miners paid before 10 to 20% of the gold they collected from the mines as protection payments to the organized crime group. But currently, the Colombian Gulf clan asks actually an unrealistically high extortion tax to work in the mines. So it is not attractive anymore for local people. Moreover, they bring in miners from other regions in Colombia in order to have more control over the mines. And this reflects that monopolizing elements of the business and dominating parts of the mining chain through violence, intimidation, and extortion, the crime groups effectively achieve control while fortifying their reputation and authority in the region. So local politics infiltrated by such groups are not willing or able to do something against their activities in the region, as you can imagine. Moreover, the existing infrastructures of those organized crime groups facilitate illegal mining and transportation. As we describe in our book, organized crime uses helicopters used for smuggling drugs to transport gold from the mines in the jungle to the city. And this reflects perfectly how the criminal infrastructure, but also the know-how developed by organized crime groups to exert control and power via other crimes can be transferred to other activities when opportunities arise. For instance, the mining camps of Madre de Dios in Peru, as the one chapter, more chapter includes actually this case of Madre de Dios in Peru. We see that the illegal mining activities are regularly linked to other serious crimes, including sexual exploitation. So this shows how crime convergence, the convergence of illegal mining and serious crimes are coming together. So looking at one crime only is, in that sense, not enough. You have to use this holistic perspective to look at the interlinks between different forms of crime, in this case, illegal mining and, for example, drugs and human trafficking. But something to add here is that organized crime also gains a lot of local support. So on the ground, based on our research fieldworks, we see that they provide security services, they provide social controls, while generating important alternative incomes for local communities, where mining offers a way to make a living in the political economy. So, as we describe in our book, those local communities, for example, in Latin America, often blame the central government providing no economic opportunities or health facilities, while they simultaneously strengthen its power with organized crime groups that are supported by local communities that actually resist the criminalization of mining. And this illustrates well how organized crime groups have a habit of interacting with the social environment in relation to illegal mining, instead of operating in a social vacuum as a sort of hierarchical organization that pressures all the power in the regions. But it shows also how organized crime groups actually replace state institutions and services via a system of patronage. Finally, if we look at environmental harms in the next sheet in relation to crime, we see that actually organized crime activities are rarely analyzed in the context of environmental issues. So the scarcity of natural resources evidently attracts organized crime groups with serious environmental consequences. We see this not only with mining, we see it also with wildlife trafficking, deforestation, waste trafficking. Organized crime groups are more and more involved. At least it is more visible that they are involved. And from a green criminological perspective, we acknowledge that what should be considered as environmental crime and harm extends actually our anthropocentric viewpoint that victims are only human. In our discussion in parts of our book, we argue that victims of environmental harm are human and non-human entities. And by increasingly acknowledging that environmental issues for more local level extend actually to a wider level of harms, as we see in our globalized world with many environmental issues, we should understand this local global dynamic to understand the consequences that it may have, that illegal mining may have for entire communities, ecosystems, animals. In other words, actually it negatively affects all of us. And this serves to understand the organized crime nature dynamic, as the diversification of organized crime groups into gold mining causes large-scale destruction of natural environments, with disastrous effects for both environment and indigenous local populations in the area. This is a picture. I visited this village it's an Embera village in Colombia, where you see that many indigenous people complain about the pollution of the local areas where mining takes place, illegal mining takes place. Where, for example, in the Colombian Darien Gap or the Peruvian Amazon, chemical products are being used during mining, such as mercury, which pollutes the soil and rivers, and the local communities, they don't have clean drinking water anymore. But also the animals depend on this for their survival. So it affects actually health issues, it affects local populations that are sometimes have to flee from their hometowns while losing their culture and livelihoods. But also, of course, large-scale deforestation is a serious issue here. We see that organized crime groups, they stay for a while in one region, then they move to another region, destroy the jungle, and start again by mining activities, for example, for gold. And this may affect on the living environment of both local people and animals. In the Congo, we see many examples where indigenous people depend on the forest for their livelihood. They gather wood, medicine, food to survive. But also it causes the loss of habitat for all kinds of animal species. As we know, the Congo Basin and the Amazon rainforests are absolutely biodiversity hotspots containing many critically endangered species and ecosystems. but continuously are threatened by illegal mining activities. The indigenous and minority groups are regularly forced by displacement, by land grabbing of a few powerful people that use small armed groups to displace entire communities from their land. And these examples illustrate how ecological environments and both human and non-human entities are interlinked, underlining how victimization is experienced through the environmental crime continuum. And from this perspective, the extensive damage and destroying of ecosystem via mining by organized crime can be considered a form of ecocide, as the peaceful enjoyment by the inhabitants, human and non-human, of a given territory has been seriously diminished. And this is especially the case with indigenous and local communities that are forced to leave because the jungles around them disappear or are heavily polluted. So they become sick or don't have drinking water anymore. And the organized crime nature dynamic illustrates this not only the attractiveness of the resource-rich areas for exploitation and plundering by organized crime, but also how biodiversity hotspots with many endangered species, important ecosystem functions, and a high diversity of human societies face the increasing anthropogenic threats of mining activities, violating the principles of both environmental and ecological justice. So this reflects how both the environmental harms in relation to environmental justice and ecological justice are important to take into consideration what are the effects of illegal mining and the role of organized crime groups in this. Yuliya, your mic.
Yes, sorry. No, I was thanking you for shedding light on this important topic related to ecocidal activity and also environmental justice and harms to humans and non-humans. We don't have too much time left until the end of the presentation, and I still have a lot of information to share, so I'll quickly go through a few ideas that we cover in the book. One is certainly responses to illegal mining, and when we discuss this particular topic in the book, we make a distinction between illegal mining connected to serious criminal organizations and informal mining, which is conducted mostly by indigenous communities, local communities. These are usually non-violent activities, but at the same time, they're not formally registered with the state, so they should be considered as extra legal. And their informal status is actually the weak point that makes these communities vulnerable to the exploitation by organized crime. And in many countries which experience informal mining, we were actually able to see the influence, the harmful influence of organized crime groups. And the point that I'm trying to make is that formalization of artisanal mining communities is absolutely crucial to be able to prevent organized crime groups from ripping off profits from mining and also from jeopardizing local communities, indigenous groups, etc. So, those policy communities and countries in which illegal mining is a problem with the participation of organized crime should take decisive steps towards the formalization process and making sure that this formalization process is sustainable, in the sense that informal mining communities have access to some financial resources, to environmentally friendly equipment and things like that. I don't have too much time to go in details, but the formalization process needs to be long-term. It needs to require political will from respective governments. Otherwise, as Daan mentioned, organized criminal groups will be preferred because they provide reliable protection on a sustainable terms, right, for local communities. And that's something that the states or governments need to avoid. Okay. This is a picture from Ukraine where you see a group of amber diggers they were, because back in the time, the process, they were working illegally without any paperwork, without any authorization. They felt extremely uncomfortable to show their face, and these groups usually act somewhere in between organized crime and artisanal miners. And that's an important dimension of the problem. Finally, quick mention of illegal financial flows associated with illegal mining. This topic was covered in 2015 and 2013 by Financial Action Task Force. They looked at the dynamics of the issue related to money laundering based on gold, as well as money laundering based on diamonds. They also covered the important aspect of terrorism financing. In our book, we expanded on these dimensions by looking at the nexus between money laundering and gold. In recent years, there was a lot of discussion on this, and also with the participation of unethical or even criminal activity by gold refineries, which were part of the complex scheme. And what I want to say or emphasize is that obviously gold is a very lucrative instrument for money laundering. It stores value, it generates reliable returns over time, it's accepted by most banks around the world as a form of currency. It can be traded anonymously, particularly after refining, after this beneficiation process, or after polishing for diamonds. It has high value to size ratio, so it's easy to smuggle, right? You put it in the pocket and you go. Well, maybe not in the pocket if we speak about large quantities of gold, but still, it's rather easy to hide and smuggle. Sometimes there are cases when gold was smelted into a form of common objects such as bolts, belt buckles, wrenches, and it was in that shape. It was smuggled across the border to make sure that law enforcement, customs officials would not really pay attention to bolts, right? And then they could be melted into gold objects and sold in the market. And importantly, there is still very little transparency of gold trade and diamond trade. They are both considered as insider businesses. One case quickly, and I'm going to finish. In the Latin American context, we were able to discover this very interesting case of the Sanchez Paredes cartel. So this drug cartel from Peru was able to control 2 mines. And interestingly, they managed to collect cocaine, transform it into cocaine base, and then bring it to the mines for further processing. Interestingly, chemicals used for production cocaine can be also used for the production of gold, such as calcium oxide or quicklime, right? So, and that because they controlled the mine, and this substance was needed for gold recovery, they could divert quicklime from the legal supply towards drug production. And then those mines were used to claim sales from cocaine as sales of gold. And then finally, the US government was able to seize funds from accounts of gold mining companies in the United States. Importantly, those were in RAM confiscations as proceeds of drug trafficking. And then gold refineries featured in this case, and one of the refineries signed a non-prosecution agreement with admitted to violate the Bank Secrecy Act. These are just some highlights of the case. Feel free to look at this case a little bit further when you have time. So, concluding remarks: organized crime groups are interested and willing to control or participate in illegal mining. They can abuse artisanal mining operations for purposes of illicit enrichment directly or indirectly. Illegal mining is deeply intertwined with other crimes: trafficking in persons, smuggling of migrants, environmental crimes, money laundering, etc. The illegal informal mining constitutes a challenge for legislators and law enforcement. And finally, illegal mining and related crimes should be raised in importance at the international policy level. Thank you very much for your attention. I'll stop here.
Thank you both, Yuliya and Daan. That was a really, really interesting presentation. And I have to say, one of the things I really liked about your book and was how holistic the approach was, like how many dimensions you looked at in terms of how illegal mining was intersecting with these other crime types. There are a few questions in the chat. One was, Yuliya, earlier on you mentioned a report about sand, and we have a colleague here who'd like to know the name of the report. It was really early in your presentation.
Can we go to the next question? I'm looking for the report. I'm going to share it.
Sure, no worries. And when you find it, you can just type it in or let us know. The next question is from a colleague that says, very interesting research, especially on the diversification on crime. Can you discuss how the research was conducted?
Yeah, there were. I was one of my case study on Colombia was based on a study on diversification, but where there were also other authors in the book who approached diversification of organized crime. What I did for my study, I started with collecting international environmental crime cases and look at them by cluster analysis to see what type of crime groups are there. And one of the requirements was that it was a case where on one hand an environmental crime was involved, and on the other hand another serious crime, most often drugs, human trafficking, weapon trafficking. But in addition to the quantitative analysis, I also conducted field work to triangulate the research results and to triangulate qualitative and quantitative research, to understand also the local dimension, the socio-economic and political dimension, which is often hard to identify through international crime cases, for example. So yeah, that is briefly how parts of the research was conducted. But what I can do, I can send you a link to some of the articles that I have published, but also more information will be in the book about the methods behind it. Thank you so much for your interest.
Thank you, Dan. Marion has a follow-up question. She asks, is there a particular section of the book focusing on the supply chain?
Yeah, I was typing. See, it's so hard to speak and then also type. Yes.
Yes.
We have one chapter that tackles the question in the supply chain specifically. It's in the title, chapter 11, by Naomi van der Valk and Liselot Bishop. They look in Peru. But as we know, supply chains can be quite diverse. In my chapter on money laundering, I looked at supply chains and how refineries and other gold-related businesses operate and what the vulnerabilities are in terms of money laundering. So we do cover that. And then also the chapter on iron ore in Mexico, it includes a discussion of ports and vulnerabilities of maritime seaports in Mexico as it comes to the importation and exportation of iron ore and the participation of Mexican drug cartels in the process, whether they control the port or they participate in iron ore trafficking activities and things like that.
Great, thank you. Could you talk more about the relationship between forced labor and illegal mining? Is this more related to socioeconomic vulnerability or rather to cohesion? Thank you. Coercion or cohesion, Giovanna?
Well, we do cover forced labor activities also in the context of Peru, Madre de Dios. And I think that's an interesting aspect. Sometimes illegal miners or workers, artisanal, I should rather call them artisanal miners because they do not always constitute organized crime. They work under the conditions of exploitation and they are not fully cognizant about about their rights, about opportunities, etc. So I think that's something that needs to be mentioned. And obviously, sometimes children are involved in the process, and these children oftentimes come from vulnerable indigenous communities. Sometimes they speak their native tongue, which is not Spanish, so there needs to be more involvement of very unique translation and interpreting specialists to be able to help those children. I know I once spoke to somebody from the United States Department of State working on labor trafficking in Amazonian highlands. And she said that we can't even speak to those victims because they speak a very particular language, and this is not Spanish, doesn't help them anymore. So we are speaking about isolated communities which do not know much about their rights, and they're being exploited for labor and for sex, because I think there are very many linkages between those two different, but also in some sense similar crimes, because they're all vulnerabilities.
Yes, I think I can add here that I fully agree that on the local level, if you talk to the people involved in mining, but also that you see that we are talking about real vulnerable populations, far away from the federal government, and they feel also not being heard by any governmental institutions, but also health services, etc. So they are looking for economic opportunities, and you can imagine when there is a big mining place ongoing, and a lot of men are there, is that there will be some, in that sense, economic opportunities that can be seen as sexual exploitation for local women in the area, but also stories about children indeed being used for sexual services in and around the mining camps in Colombia. So there is a link, and but is it always forced? That is a difficult question. The women I talked to said to me that they were going voluntarily to the mining areas. So it's a difficult question to answer, but I can imagine that, of course, some higher people are maybe backing up some of the people there and arrange that, there are arrange the formal side of the sexual exploitation.
Yeah, excellent point. I didn't write the chapter on trafficking in persons, but I think our author mentioned the influence of parents and families and caretakers. So that some of children were brainwashed, so they were sent to the region, but then they didn't realize what they would be doing, right? And then they're trapped. So that's another interesting dimension. So it's quite complex. I'm not sure we can answer that question on socioeconomic vulnerability versus coercion. I think it's a little bit of both.
Absolutely, and very complex. Thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. I really, really enjoyed the talk, and I think the concept, and I think, your comment at the beginning about it's not really an emerging crime, as we've kind of classified it at UNODC, it is a re-emerging crime because it's as ancient as, so many different, cultural trafficking, etc. These are very old time activities that have lent themselves to illicit profits. So thank you for that. Colleagues and members of the permanent mission, we have the book Illegal Mining as an ebook available, and we also have the print copy. So if anybody would like to borrow the print or use the online ebook version, please feel free. And we can see that Yuliya is flashing the cover of the book for us. Thank you.
It's a thick book. Yeah, it's a lot of reading.
It is, but it's, I think, very worth it. And of course, it's nicely structured, so you could choose the chapters you're more interested in. And no, I greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much. And I think we'll say goodbye to everybody. But yes, thank you.
Thank you for having us. Thank you for paying attention to this topic and also to the book. We hope that it will make a small change in scholarship as well as maybe in policy communities. So thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.